Good morning, everyone. This is Mike Ching, and I know many of you on this call, but for those who I haven't met, I recently retired from UBS as the Deputy Head of America's Equities Research. And I remember when I took the job shortly after the financial crisis started, I found myself often asking why I did that, why I took that job, what had I done? But one of the things that really helped me navigate all the challenges at the time were some periodic ADOR or SIFMA meetings where a bunch of us could get together, commiserate a little bit, discuss industry changes, and just compare notes. So obviously that's not possible right now. So when Kaushik proposed this webinar to me, I thought it could be a great alternative for all of you. So we have 4 great panelists who have graciously agreed to share their thoughts with us, but we hope that everyone chimes in during the session. So if you have any question at any point, just raise your hand and we'll call on you to ask your question. So let's get started actually with maybe just some general comments from each panelist about the impact that COVID-19 has had on the way they manage sell-side research. And maybe we'll start just with Mark Harris. Actually, for those who don't know Mark on the call, maybe Mark, you give your background and then just talk about what you've seen, how COVID has impacted your business.
Sure. So good morning. Thanks, Michael. And good morning to everybody out there. Good morning, my fellow panelists. So I'm Mark Harris. I'm the head of research at Evercore ISI. I've been in that role here at Evercore for going on 2 years. Prior to that, I was the head of research at RBC Capital Markets for about 15 years. So what I would tell you is, I mean, to use for those of you who are old film fans and know the movie Buckaroo Banzai, the more things change, the more they stay the same. To quote the film. I would tell you that while, we could argue that, everything kind of pivoted when the coronavirus crisis hit, the fundamental underpinnings of, I think, what made research successful, what worked during the pandemic, what continues to work during the pandemic, I think has definitely remained the same. We've found, as a sort of top research provider on the street, and I think somebody who, is viewed as having some pretty good content. The reality was, clients were already well on the way towards focusing on best-in-class content, limiting down their spend and focusing it on those who could provide that best-in-class content. And I think largely the pandemic just sort of laser focused that same trend line. We've seen in terms of our consumption metrics and the demand for our product, a huge uptick in the amount of focus on it. And in particular, and not just across healthcare, but really across all areas, as you would suspect, and really an intensity of that focus. Now, the delivery of it, how we can talk more, certainly, and I'm sure all of us will talk a little bit about how our corporates are dealing with it differently, how the virtual pivot has, sort of changed, some of the structures of how we're delivering it. But at the end of the day, the underlying concept of providing good quality research, the fundamental field work to get there, all of that is largely the same. Even recruitment, other things. I mean, it's all fitting into the same general approach. It's just a matter of making sure that we're able to take advantage as much as we can off an environment. I think we're hearing a little bit of echo out there, and somebody who might not be on mute. The headline I would give you in terms of the change to the environment is largely around, a focus on, I think, I think really around retention of the best quality talent. I wouldn't say that's harder or easier, but that remains the same. And probably the biggest challenge I think is around engagement with some of that internal talent. That includes, our outsourcing partners like the folks at a value serve, but at the end of the day, we were sort of already used to that with those. One of the things I've certainly found is that we have a lot of learnings from our people who are already working out of branch offices, and we've leveraged a lot of them to sort of, apply those lessons to those who are all of a sudden adjusting into this environment over the past, 5, 6, 7 months. So, but I tell you, again, I go back, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's still about quality content, but the pivot, and I'm sure we'll just all talk about that quite a lot, and how virtual is working for us and all that, it is really not, it's more of a technical change, not a fundamental change.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Susan, your thoughts?
Yes, hi, Susan Gilbertson. I'm the head of U.S. research at Mizuho, here for about 2+ years. Prior to that, I was 14 years at Jefferies, where I was the deputy global head of research. So similar to what Mark said is that at the foremost, it's about high quality product and service, and it will always remain about the client experience of our product and service. But I think the biggest challenges that we have is that whereas we all obsessed about how do we optimize the experience with the phone and travel, now what we have is a client who is actually working from their desktop and experiencing more volume than they've ever had before in terms of the amount of corporate access and the amount of research services, and again it's coming through the desktop. So I think the challenge that we have here is, with the client service in mind, how do we help our clients manage their time and their calendars, given the backdrop that we have, because it's more time at their desk. As we all know, we're all at our desk a lot more, and more in front of our desktop. So what we've been trying to make sure is that we're helping our clients manage their time and their calendars, and trying to create a more curated product that better reflects the digital experience. So whether that is shorter attention spans, because to be honest, people are multitasking more because they're sitting at their desktop. It's what we're seeing is a demand for shorter meetings. In terms of the content, everything is getting almost commoditized. So how do you retain value and exclusivity for products and services, and just dealing with that dynamic. So I think just to add to what Mark said, that's our experience.
Okay, thanks. Susan. Hey, Jim, do you want to go?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Michael. So Jim Kelly, I'm the Director of Research at SVB Leerink, the ADR here, as well as at Credit Suisse. I'm just going to add a couple of angles on what was said here, because I think really this sort of bit on how we are working from home has decreased the transaction and the friction costs for how things are delivered to the clients. So what we've all seen, I think, because I've talked to several of you, is an important increase in consumption. So our increasing supply has been met. I'm not sure I want to say with demand, but I would definitely say an increasing acceptance of supply in a virtual world. And it's also led to a decrease in boundaries. One of the things that we're finding as we communicate both with our internal people as well as with our clients is that the work day and work week and the work month and the work quarter has no stop and no start. It is just one continuum of an experience. And so this has some benefits for those who can handle it, but it also has some costs, long-term costs that I think we all need to think about our people and how we end up working through this over time. This pivot to how we're thinking about the impact, as it looks as the numbers for coronavirus infections start to skyrocket again in this country and in the rest of the world. It's likely that return to the office is not going to be happening soon. We're going to be living with this boundary reduced world for a pretty extended period of time. And we have to think about it, what it means for our people and for our clients.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Nalendra?
Hi, thanks, Mike. Nilendra Dimel here. I'm the Chief Admin Officer for Research at Deutsche Bank. Seems to be the representative from Europe in this discussion. No, just similar to all the other panelists, pretty much our experience has been, it's certainly at the start of this whole incident in March, it was such a shock to the system. Not only were we going through some structural changes from a DB perspective, having shut down our equity business just 6 months before the whole coronavirus crisis. We are moving to transitioning to a new model, and then plus you see the whole impact of the crisis, trying to get our IT systems working and so on and so forth. But I mean, the positive was it surprisingly was a sharp, it was certainly a sharp shock to the system, but I think everything held together. Our IT systems came through, our IT colleagues have done an amazing job, I think, in the midst of all this to get the technology working. And for pretty much 80% of our entire global staff to be working from home within a matter of couple of weeks. So it was certainly an eye-opening experience. We continue to see a lot of demand for, as you said, the content coming from the research analyst. And we've been obviously trialing out our new model as a standalone equity research division as well, and trying to get the product out. We've seen a pretty good increase for our corporate access and conference events in the middle of all this. There's certainly a lot of requests now, especially that travel has been cut off. Things like scheduling has become a big challenge because you've got people from Asia, US, Europe, everybody trying to obviously get access to these products. So it's been a challenge, but a good one. And I think we've seen our consumption increase, our billable hours increase, and readership increase. So that's been a good outcome at the end.
Thanks, Nalindra. All right, so let's talk about some specifics, because one of the things I seem to recall was that clients often complained that they did not have enough time to read all the research that was coming to them already. And now I would assume that since analysts aren't traveling anymore, they're actually putting more stuff out. So maybe, Susan, you can talk a little bit about what initiatives have you implemented to kind of maximize distribution, improve the client experience? Are you using more video? Are you using less text? More? Give us an update.
Right. So and you bring up a great point, because so again, I'm coming back to, what the client experience is that they are being deluged with a high increase in volume in terms of both access, service, research, and they're having a real problem in having to manage their calendars. So what we're trying to do is, so we're having less focus, which we would have had if you had talked to me, say 6 or 9 months ago, where, we were obsessing in terms of, how can we make sure that we're maximizing, the mobile phone experience and the digital experience there. What we're trying to do is to make sure that we're maximizing them and how they use their time and their calendar. So I'm going to come to something that you're going to laugh at, but I'm going to say that, reliance on email is really not decreased as we probably, all had hoped for and wanted. But in fact, reliance on email has increased, and it's because it's research by its very nature is an experiential process, and we've been deprived of that experiential process. So we looking at all our comm platforms, and email remains the one where boring, old-fashioned, but it's the one that allows us just not to deliver content. So I'm going to use email not as a way of delivering content, but it's a way of touching the client and reminding the client that we have products, that we have services. So then we can follow up with, the more tactile, experiential, can I have a call? Can I bundle content for you with my analyst? So we're relying increasingly on email. We are obviously, everything is all digital. It's all video. We're not using so much of the video format for delivery of product, because what we can see quite clearly is people are a little bit up to here with digital and with video, and so I think the demand or the desire to look at yet another video has decreased. But what we are seeing is that clients are asking us for, okay, this is good. Can I speak with your analyst? And I don't want an hour of their time, and maybe this is us, I'm just talking from our experience. but they're managing their calendars and they're asking for meetings that are short. So it's, intense bursts of analyst meeting, analyst content, or if it's a corporate access, it's a one-on-one exclusive packaged with an expert. So what we're doing is just trying to make sure that it's, in a Netflix world where you're all demand, all time, that we're trying to be responsive and in fact be a sort of all-on channel for them, but in a way that's exclusive, that provides the content to them in a way that's curated for their needs, their consumption, their calendar, their time. So, nothing revolutionary here. Obviously, digital curation of content, giving them what they want, when they want it, how they want it, remains absolutely a priority for us because that is creating, a client experience that is something that they want. We all live in a digital world now, right? We all used to curation. We all want to on-call. We want it when we want it, how we want it. That's our responsibility still to provide that to the client. So I'm not saying we're de-emphasizing that. I'm just saying that in terms of our experiential, high-touch service, that has had to take a notch up in terms of intensity and in terms of content.
Okay. And maybe Jim, if you could add your thoughts on that and specifically tell us, are you doing anything differently in terms of managing corporate access? I'm assuming conferences aren't a real option right now. So how are we getting the CEOs and CFOs in front of the clients?
Well, the interesting thing that we're seeing is that corporate, the CEOs are actually being relatively available. The fact that they don't have to get on a plane, there's actually, I feel from what we're picking up, a very good amount of availability. So really and also I think it's part of how they're running their business. They're also very, very comfortable in our experience being on the screen and being visible for the client. The client isn't always ready to reciprocate that, but we definitely are seeing very good video connectivity and availability for corporate access. What we're finding, especially in where all the markets, whether you're in healthcare or economic sensitive, the developments are very, very rapid and things are changing, is that the notion of having a conference idea and then figuring out how you're going to get there in 9 months for a thematic conference is a waste of time. You have to be ready if you're going to have a thematic conference to make that decision and then actually execute on it in sub 10 weeks. And so we've been spawning off lots and lots of small conferences with a mixture of corporate and key opinion leader / consultant content wrapped in it to kind of meet the need of what's evolving inside the marketplace, and also kind of surrounding those with a good amount of one-on-one types of access. Again, not having to deal with the cost of the one-on-one rooms, the breakdown of the hotel room the night before, the put it back together again the day after. You really can be a lot more inventive and creative, and we've taken a chance and filled that space with a lot more. And not everything works, but the cost of failure is a lot lower these days, and so we're trying to encourage people to take those chances.
Okay, thanks. And Mark, maybe you can, I remember there used to be a healthcare conference by a big firm every January that had zillions of people go to. It was a great networking opportunity for everyone. How do you replace that part of the research equation in terms of getting people connected to experts, private companies, and other investors?
Well, the pivot to virtual has in many ways enabled that rather than diminished it, right? As Jim just made the comment, it's the friction cost, the cost overall is dramatically lower than it would. So taking the chances on that and even expanding the scale of these things it is actually a good experiment and oftentimes beneficial. When we track our consumption metrics across all of our events, they're up dramatically. I mean, I'll give you kind of a sampling. Our webinar participation, and we were already very big in doing webinars and other events. We're up 100% in terms of the number of webinars we're doing. Even our conferences and our corporate access together is up in terms of consumption. Tracked consumption value is up about 15% year on year. And again, we were already pretty robust in terms of the amount that we generated. we took every one of our conferences, we pivoted it virtual as soon as this environment was happening. We'd already had a fair amount of experience with virtual because we were doing a lot of these, sort of webinar type events, and we just went full force with it. We took some of our events that even, we had a consumer conference. It was going to be our first time sort of launching this size and scale of event across every one of our consumer sectors. And we pivoted that immediately into virtual. And what we saw was, as you would suspect, more clients participating than we've ever had before, because geography, location, and timing of being there doesn't matter, and more corporate participation than we ever could have expected, because they don't have to get on the plane, the train, the automobile. I think the greater concern is obviously the diminishment of value around it, with it being so much easier for a CEO or CFO or head of IR or head of a division or anybody like that to get on a call with the sell side, and frankly with our clients as well. There is a sort of thought around, how do we make sure we retain the value of it? How do we make sure we don't diminish ourselves in this process and diminish, our relationship connectivity, which is part of, the way we monetize what we do as a research group. And I think there's a number of ways to do that. In my mind, a lot of it is around providing both let's call it the sort of more open access fireside chat, but concurrently also asking our corporates and our partners and our experts to do specialty events to follow. So again, as opposed to, even if it's not a full-blown conference, let's say it's just a speaker series kind of event. Well, normally we might have kept that limited. Maybe the answer is it's a more open-ended, shorter event, and then a series of longer events, but it's getting that commitment from that good partner and contact to begin with. That's part of what retains the value. I also think, beyond corporate access, look, corporates are at some point going to choose to do what they do, right? I think we have great relationships with them. We all do. We're going to continue to leverage those. Those will have value. But if some of them choose to go direct to our clients, as some of them have already chosen to do over the years, we can only control that to a certain degree. So where can we continue to add value? It's through experts. It's through other things that, in essence, we own and control. Connectivity through a network of interesting people, I think, is one of the greater values we can bring. And Michael, to your question on sort of privates and other things, I don't think you treat those dramatically differently than you do the public ones at a big conference event. As long as you provide the forum and your salespeople are doing their job of creating that connectivity, helping to tell the stories to the clients to get them there, I think at the end of the day, it all comes together as it should, and without too much problem. And again, that's been our experience so far. I will tell you, we've got our one of our bigger events of the year, our healthcare conference, coming up with 1,000+ attendees at it, right ahead of the one that Michael referred to that tends to happen in January. We've done this event for a couple of years. Tends to be live in Boston. This year it won't be. I'll tell you after that one whether let's call it 100+ private companies that we're going to have at that event. We do as great a job for them in a virtual world as we did in the live world, but I suspect we will. And in some ways, I suspect we may even have greater and more intensive connectivity with, frankly, less friction, because it's just easier for them to be there and easier to schedule them out.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Nalendra, maybe we'll pivot a little bit given your administrative responsibilities as well. You can feel free to add your thoughts about the general comments about distribution and corporate access and conferences, but from a compliance perspective on the administrative side, given so much more stuff is being handled virtually, have you had any concerns about whether there's compliance from the analyst, from the corporates in that level, in that type of communication, since it's not as directly monitored?
Well, I think this is, it boils down to the situation, right? What kind of a relationship do you have with your employees? We've always kind of encouraged flexible working with analysts for a while, be it, trying to be flexible with all their travel. You'll have, somebody maybe being out of office for a couple of weeks, touring the world, going and meeting corporates and coming back. So there's always that extra element of working virtually and connecting virtually, and in the life of an analyst. I think it's obviously got exaggerated a lot with the whole COVID situation, but it's that element has been there. We've had a structure where certain elements of staff like supervisory analysts have always been working from home for majority of the time. So when you combine all that, yes, it's not a novel concept, but it certainly involves some extra measures and some measures that we had to implement, like even some basic stuff like printing being a difficulty when you're working from home, right? That's been a proper challenge that you would not really think of in the normal world. You'll at least, even if you're traveling for a couple of weeks, you'll go back to the office, take all the printouts you want. Analyst, being an analyst, you want to see it written, you want it printed out on paper, on how it looks. So those are the niggles, I think, that we've really had to encounter. And then comm surveillance will always come and pick something up, saying, okay, let's have a FaceTime chat. And then this comes up in their lexicon from a compliance perspective, and it becomes a conversation, right? Why aren't we using the approved channels of communication? What is this thing called Zoom that kept up coming on at the start of the whole pandemic, when we didn't have anything like that approved? So and then for some analysts, again, technology can be a little bit challenging to get when you're used to going for meetings, meeting people personally, and having that. So I think the biggest challenge from a compliance perspective has been initially around communication, the channels, what is approved, what is not, trying to kind of demarcate between the different types of video, the calling technologies that are out there, and understanding what the client wants, what a bank could allow based on the structures that we have, this infrastructure we have, and then complying with it. We've obviously tried to do a lot more education around working from home as well, just constant messaging, communication. We've encouraged all our supervisors to be in contact with their staff. Again, that's the difficulty, I think, especially on the junior side of the scale, when you have new grads and interns coming in, or we've had to onboard quite a few people virtually and who do not understand the setup and explaining them. It's not as easy as possibly going and having a coffee with them and a compliance officer explaining some of these things to them. And sometimes they learn the hard way out, right, by doing something which is not perfectly compliant, which might have been compliant in a different setting. So those are the challenges, and it's a lot of communication. We've tried to do classroom sessions now in Europe, starting in Europe, where we've got a conduct officer having some classroom sessions for the analyst and the community to even basic things like, catching up with your team members, communication etiquette and stuff like that. But it's a learning process, and I think we've matured certainly from where we were in March. People are feeling the fatigue now, I do feel, and there's so many requests coming in. Can we at least have a day in office or some opportunity to meet up with the teams? That's a constant question that I get. So yeah, I think we'll have to have some form of connectivity, and that will certainly help. But from a compliance perspective, we've tried a lot. Nothing significantly has changed, because it's still, if you want to log in and access the system, you need to do it using the secure access that you've got. Technically, you are supposed to use your phones and the approved channels. We didn't monitor the analyst community for 24 hours before the pandemic, and we won't do it after the pandemic. So as far as that element is concerned, it's a lot of trust. It's what people know best, and educating them on how to kind of handle this current situation.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Michael, can I add
Sure.
something?
Yes, please.
Okay. It's me. So I 100% agree with what Narendra just said. But in terms of all communication being digital for corporate access, what we're seeing is we're getting more requests. I'm interested to hear if others experience this. We're getting more requests for recordings and transcripts from corporate access, from expert calls than we did before. And I think it's, as I said before, the sheer volume and the intensity of the video experience that everybody's experiencing. And you have to wonder, just because it's human nature, that whether conversations are going to be compliant. They've always been compliant. It's not what I'm implying by any stretch of the imagination. But will conversations become more constrained as a result of that? That the fact that it is digital, and we all understand the implications from looking at the retail world of everything and journalism when all conversations are digital, right, and can be repurposed. So that's just my add for that.
Thanks. Just to kind of actually move a little bit, I know, Mark, you mentioned a little bit earlier about managing the analyst in this environment has been a little bit of a challenge. Obviously, Nalendra talked about, trusting your employees. My experience has been a lot of analysts are very set in their ways. And I remember an analyst that basically traveled every day from January 2nd until I was closed, and then didn't travel at all anytime after that. I know II is coming out next week. I think it's coming out next Tuesday. Maybe Mark, talk about what's been the biggest surprises that you faced in trying to manage the analyst population over the last 7 months.
So probably the biggest surprise has been the fact that many of those road warriors have so readily transitioned to this virtual environment. There are people I could name on my platform, people who have been, #1 ranked analysts for decades, multiple of them, who I never ever would have anticipated would actually embrace the idea of the efficiency and impact of leveraging the virtual environment, and yet have embraced it. Now, I think the vast majority of people are anxious to come back to some version of a regularized live environment. But I will tell you, there's not a person on the platform who hasn't had, even the most set in their ways folks, who have not had, I think, a change of heart about the flexibility of working from home, the I think value of hitting the road the way they might have done it in the past, every place, every region, every city, every location, live and in person. I think all of them, to a person, have had a bit of a religious transformation of how they think about the value of that. Again, I think everyone's anxious to have, a bit of a reunion with live human bodies face to face. And we'll embrace that when it comes. I think there will be a bolus of activity. But if I was taking a guess looking ahead, I would tell you that I think that we will, and this is just purely Mark Harris's ballpark estimate based on intelligent conversations with a lot of peers, a lot of analysts, a lot of corporates. If I was taking a bet, I would tell you that I think that when we normalize, get back to a post-vaccine normal environment, I'd be surprised if we were going to do, or the street in general will do, or the clients will be willing to do anything more than about 50 or 60% of the normal live marketing, whether that's corporate access, whether that's analyst marketing or various versions thereof. 50 or 60% of would probably be my guess as to what we'll do. And there's people who would bet on the even the lower side of that. But that's my bet as to where we'll end up being. So I think it's less about that and people understanding those efficiencies, more about my concerns on people, on the people side of this are less the client connectivity. It's more about how do we take young up and coming analysts and make sure they're getting introduced to clients. That's hard in this environment, and I think will be even harder going forward. And I think we've got to break through that barrier and figure that out. And we're trying to figure out ways to do that, but there's no easy answer to that, certainly at the moment. But I think co-marketing with experienced people, even virtually, I think helps with it. Casual events, even in a virtual world, help with that. And I think also, the sort of, the associate staff, making sure they're live and in person in the offices. That collegial environment, that connectivity, that ability to walk out to the desk, see your salespeople, see your traders, watch the flow, hear ECM, all the things that go with it, I think can't be replaced in a virtual environment. And I think they need that, they want it. And as you would expect, when we're starting to return back to the office to even a smaller degree as we are beginning at the end of October, I think it's going to be the first people coming back as we've gone through our surveys. Definitively, it's actually a barbell. There's a small number of very senior analysts who are going to come back to a small degree on an every other week basis. And then who will be there as often as they possibly be? It's, I think, the youngest people on our spectrum, not surprisingly. They want it, they need it, not just because they're in an apartment, working off a dining room table with 6 other people in their studio, but on top of that, because it's just, they want that interaction, they want the engagement, and they want the mentorship.
Great. Hey, Jim, any thoughts on the challenges you've seen in managing the analyst in the last 7 months?
It's not too importantly different than what we just heard there. So I won't belabor it. I would kind of come back to merging that comment with a little bit about the conferences, is that we've become extraordinarily efficient at delivery in a timeline that none of us could have expected because of the situation. So we've moved years forward in that, and we've lost the incidental contact along the way, right? What's missing from the conferences is we all have the memory of, oh, I ran into so-and-so at the such and such. No one's run into so-and-so at the such and such for 6 or 7 months now, okay? That part has been wiped out. And whether that's a event happening at one of our conferences, or I just walked over to the commissary, kitchen, sales floor, whatever it is, those pieces are so important to development. They might even really be important to the way that we relate as humans. And so finding that, now maybe there are technology solutions. I think that all of us are watching the technological platform developments that are going on around our various, around our conferences, and are there things that can be done. We'll see if anyone really cracks a good code, because incidental, accidental isn't necessarily how those generally can be designed, but we'll see. But that is so crucial and a really big thing that's on my mind a lot about how people are going to grow and how analysts are going to engage.
Okay, thanks. Susan, when are your people coming back in the office?
We have a second wave coming back in about a week's time, but the uptake has been less than anticipated. And so we just have a few, 1 or 2 seniors who have been there throughout, and a few associates. So I think people, to just echo what everybody's saying, we've been surprised, and I don't think pleasantly, because we expected it of our analysts, and they've really stepped up and done it beautifully. The productivity has been, higher than normal, because we're spending more time in front of our desktops. But I 100% echo in terms of, we've had lots of new analysts and associates starting, and we've missed that connectivity and sharing the culture, because culture is so important to research departments and to firms, that we haven't been able to do that as quickly or as efficiently as we'd like. I personally think that is one of the challenges that we have in terms of, what is the ethos of the firm, what's the culture, and how do we do things at your particular firm that makes you different and special. So that's one of the things that we're struggling with. The experiential aspect of research that I always hammer on, that it is an experiential process. We're struggling, as Mark said, with trying to get associates up to speed in terms of interacting with clients on that very casual basis, in terms of pick up the phone, we have this client on, and learning about what clients care about. So we're going to have to pay extra attention to that. And then the other thing that I just want to bring up in terms of on the communication side is what we find that clients are missing most from conferences is that casual conversation. The speaker finished, and there was a conversation with, my buddy, the sell side, the buy sider, and the casual conversation. We're trying to figure out how we do that digitally, or if you do in a future world where we do, some virtual, some physical, so that we can still capture the efficiency of a digital world, but still have that, the communality of shared information from our clients that they value, that they tell us that they value. We do, tons, as everybody is doing. We're doing tons and tons of, Zoom calls, happy hours, where the clients are getting that connectivity and that community, which is important. But I think the sidebar conversation is still irreplaceable at this point, as it is in all, and it's a reflection of the communication within the department, because it's that sidebar conversation. I can walk the hall and I see somebody, looking down or looking particularly happy, and you could just, have a casual conversation. And those are the things as managers, that we have to do. And this is, again, it has been made more difficult, no matter how great our digital tools are.
Thanks. So Nalendra, with all this as a backdrop, less analysts needing to be in the office, and I know this is the end of the year budget cycle for planning for 2021. Have you started making any decisions regarding real estate planning for next year versus higher IT budgets for remote access? Is that part of the discussion at all yet?
Well, there was, I think there were some public articles about our New York footprint, and we are obviously moving into a newer building, and as a result, there are some plenty of floors actually being mothballed, and people, especially on the infrastructure side, not on the front client-facing side of things, have been told that, just come back to work in summer next year in the new building. So that's been an interesting conversation, but that's somewhat isolated because it's a building we are trying to exit and move into a newer spacious accommodation. But and it doesn't apply to research or so on, but certainly for infrastructure. Short answer is not yet. I mean, we still, there's more, it's a more long-term thing when it comes to leases and thinking about that footprint. And I think there will be some element of working from home. We've not factored that in specifically into the budgeting process for now, unless it's one of these isolated incidents like in New York, where there are some exceptional circumstances. IT, certainly, there's a lot more focus on that. Even, things like the PCs in the office. Do we really want to keep PCs now with all these technological challenges? I mean, somebody will have a Mac, somebody will have a Windows. Why not get some compatibility? Just phase out the PCs completely, give some good laptops so that at least they can take it with them. And we are working on some common platform without some of these technological issues saying Zoom doesn't work on my Mac or Skype doesn't work on my Windows machine. So, there's certainly more thinking along that and much more infrastructure spend on IT going on. We introduced Zoom into DB within a couple of months. So that's unheard of for some new technology, to go through sourcing, to go through contracting, and to have IT introducing something like that fast is pretty amazing. So, there's certainly a lot more investment on that front, and there will be some extra budget spend on that area for next year. But yeah, it's a tad bit too early on the real estate side for now.
Okay, thanks. So one last question from me. Obviously over the last couple of months, you've seen a lot of volatility in the market. You could argue that a lot of the outperformance in the market's been focused on the large cap. I know there's always been a discussion about waterfront coverage, how many stocks each firm needs to cover. Also the fact that mid cap, small cap stocks, you benefit more from having, proprietary knowledge and things like that. Has the events of the last couple of months changed your views about the benefits of covering a large number of stocks? Can you make a difference in covering the large cap stocks? So Jim, maybe I'll start with you. What's your view about future coverage? Has it been impacted by COVID at all?
Thank you. It has not been impacted. We're busy expanding. We're a single sector vertical, of course, right? So we have a slightly different view, but we are expanding in large, mid, and small cap, and really trying to increase the waterfront fund coverage. I think that you really need to be in all of these places. What really, it's because it's where the clients live, right? There's the notion of we're the alpha, and that's a debatable point. But our clients live in the alpha of what their mandates are, and so we really want to make sure that we're there for the client in what they need to do inside healthcare, and so we're expanding in all of those areas.
Okay, Susan.
Yeah, it hasn't. I think when we take a look at it, we take a look at coverage always, which we're expanding. We have 5 verticals, probably expanding there, and continue to expand across both large, mid, and small cap. And as you all research managers here, we all know this. You cover companies for different reasons, right? The large caps are your franchise stocks. You trade them a lot. The gorillas. You need to know the technology. You got the small caps, which are the growth areas. Emerging technology. And then you have mid caps or SMIDs, which tend to be the good ideas that you really wanted to provide value for. So I think that matrix works, and I think it provides the best matrix set for both the analysts and, more importantly, the clients in terms of us providing our knowledge set to them. The only thing that what we've noticed is, and I think it may increase, is, for example, the ancillary services coming from the SMID cap world. Sometimes it's been difficult to get attention for a corporate access for marketing for a SMID cap company, right? That you may think is going to be great in 10 years, or it's not particularly covered, nobody knows about it, but it's an important company. So you want to get it in front of the clients, and there was a calendar where you said, you're going to be in the Midwest, and you're in the Midwest, so ergo, can you please see this company? With the virtual world and the digital calendar, that availability of, I'm in the Midwest, you're in the Midwest, can you meet this company, has disappeared. So my only question, which, I'd love to hear people's views is, how do we compete for attention, for corporate access for these small cap companies, which are really important for the story to be told? Does the price go to zero? In terms of the aggregators, in terms of how we value the services for that portion of the business. So I just think we have to, in terms of how we attribute value to coverage and streams of revenue from different forms of coverage, I just think we have to probably refine that a little bit more when we putting together, the construct for coverage. But to just reiterate, I think there is need, demand, and I think we should have, the continuum of large, small, and medium, and private companies obviously continue to be important.
Any thoughts, Mark?
I think I would not disagree. I think the continuum is important. I would maybe just add one point, which is I think in many ways high impact coverage of the benchmark names, the most visible names in any sector, frankly, makes coverage of the small caps that much more impactful and credible with the clients. Even for small cap only investors that you're dealing with, if you're not covering the most complex, high profile names in a space that often have the greatest resources to invest, to acquire, to innovate, you're sort of leaving something out. That doesn't mean covering the smaller names in the space who could be the disruptors isn't equally important. But I think there's a starting point at which you have to cover the benchmarks first. And I would argue, though, that you have to cover them in a high quality way, or you might not as well cover them at all. It is definitely a negative to spend the time on them if you're not a voice in them, if you're not credible in them, if you're not going to do them well. But if you're going to do them and do them well, I think it's accretive to everything on down. I guess put differently, I think it's much harder to just focus on small cap names and then try to bridge to the larger ones than it is to go in the opposite direction. I think it's a lot easier to be credible across the market spectrum when you're starting from the top down than when you're trying to go from the bottom up.
Thanks.
With some sector exceptions.
So we're coming up on 50 minutes. I wanted to remind people, participants on this webinar, if you have any questions, go in the participants link and raise your hand. The last question actually from me is, in my prior role, my firm spent a lot of time focusing on the value of primary research and alternative data. So I'd like actually your view about what you're doing in that area, because quite arguably a lot of that is very, very proprietary, and whether or not you've seen COVID-19 actually increase the demand for alternative data and primary research. So Susan, we'll start with you.
Great, thanks so much, Mike, as always. So I'll say something anecdotally, which in terms of, it's extremely important, and it becomes increasingly important, especially with just this emphasis on content and quality, which is magnified by the crisis. That's just time is of an essence. So the buy side have less time, and they are just much more focused on providing the best quality content and analysts and services. So on every single one of us here, that's our number one mission. In terms of the experts, there's absolutely no way that you can ever, it's hard to just say how important it is, because it is so important. My anecdote is that we finished our full year expert budget in 6 months. And so there has been a complete explosion in terms of the analysts using experts and using proprietary surveys and using proprietary data for their research, because not only does it produce better research, but because there is demand from clients. And it's not only from the primary research, but as well in terms of when you're providing corporate access, what we are finding is, for us to be able to compete, for us to be able to be paid for what is now been an explosion in volume, and we want to retain value, it's exclusivity, yes, but it's also packaging your corporate access with your experts, with value, with proprietary research. It's, we're at this point in the US, we're not, the largest among them, and we don't have, their competitors obviously have much larger, primary data budgets. We don't, and so what we're doing is trying to do a mixture of in-house, finding in-house, our own in-house sources of data, as well as buying externally. And the only thing I can tell you is the percentage of our budget, it will continue to increase going forward, because it must. We all know Reg FD changed the world, and the internet, it's no longer good enough just to repeat, what everybody is able to read. And for us to differentiate, for us to provide the quality, for us to succeed and to thrive and to grow market share, it's an imperative for us to continue to do it. We just have to be cognizant that it's expensive. And not everybody, has the huge budgets that some of the larger competitors have. But it doesn't mean as a construct that it doesn't remain important and will continue to grow in importance. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Hey, Mark, over to you.
I think it's been well said. To pretend that alternative data isn't important would be ridiculous, right? We all understand we need to and have to invest around it. I think the real crux of it is maybe focusing on where you can make a difference, as opposed to trying to compete in what rapidly becomes the commoditized curve of the space. So to use a live example of that, I think to go out today and spend inordinate amounts of dollars, or even non-inordinate amounts of dollars, buying credit card data when every one of our clients has it, when some competitors have it, I'm not sure we're adding that much value, all else being equal. But I think there's different ways to sort of scrape and look and find incremental consumer tracking insights, invest around other things that are proprietary in their own right, not chase the same, this is like, we're all a little bit like, sort of cats chasing the laser pointer. It looks bright and shiny and we almost can't resist it. I think we have to resist chasing too much of the overwrought territory and buying the same thing that frankly has reduced in its ability to generate alpha at this point, and focus on where are we going to generate our own alpha with those alternative investments. That's where we're trying to focus. That's where I'm trying to focus. That's hard, as it always has been, like research itself. But I think that's where we're all going to generate the most value. And to Susan's point, competing on dollars spent, like Michael, your former employer, they've taken an all in kind of strategy around it, which is great, and kudos to them. But I think that's not necessarily what everybody has to do. I think there's different strokes for different folks, and we'll see where that goes.
Hey, Jim, I know that Leerink has its own internal expert network. What's going on with that? Are you increasing the budget for that?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question. So, from the early years of our founding, we were actually merged with a key opinion leader / consultancy network called Metacorp. And so it's really the hallmark of a lot of our product. So we have, it's an important part. I think really it's an expectation inside our product that people are going to be using it. So the service ranges as anyone who's using any of these things does, from having the individual conversations with an analyst, having group conversations out there with clients, having survey type work. The rapidity of what's going on right now with change around, and specifically obviously because we're healthcare only, with some of the issues around healthcare and the ways that we either understand COVID or treat COVID or come up with vaccines for COVID, has led to a very rapid fire use of the conversations, either one-on-one or brought out to the clients. It's been some survey work, but it's been a lot more human and anecdotal. I don't know that I could have guessed that, though it feels obvious now in the rearview mirror that that's the way that's the way that would happen. And so that's been a very, very big part of what we're doing. The bigger question that you asked about data, absolutely still matters to us, but our real core on how we're delivering primary research is through this vehicle of our Metacorp network.
Great, thanks. All right, so I think we're going to end with, I have one question from a participant, and I'm going to embellish it a little bit. I'm going to read it. I think it has something to do with some of the challenges that your hedge fund clients have been facing in terms of performance, and obviously the move to more and more ETFs. I assume that commission flows on one hand are challenged from that side, even though volatility is up, trading volumes are up substantially. But have you thought at all about where you could see some new revenue opportunities for equity research outside the buy side, your traditional buy side client? And maybe we'll start with Nalendra, if you have a thought on that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we need to now make our ends meet from our own research product. There's no trading to kind of subsidize us anymore. So we've tried to come up again, going back to that earlier conversation. Primary research has been very important. Plus, we are now collaborating very closely with our corporate bank to access the corporates and especially products around ESG, where there is a lot of interest, not just from the buy side, but from the corporates as well. The challenge there has been, again, walking that fine line between, crossing that, just getting onto that area where it becomes consultancy and you are not on that public side of the fence anymore, and this becomes more a consulting arrangement with insider knowledge into some of these companies. So we are trying to come up and fine tune a publicly available product that is still, usable by corporates as well as the buy side. It's certainly there's certainly been a lot of interest in some of these areas and the take up on products like ESG. So we've tried to leverage those corporate bank relationships a lot, especially in our home market in Germany, where there's been a lot of the tax and S-tax companies where we've been engaged with.
Okay, great. How about you, Susan?
I'll just say that I am just happy and grateful that the converts market and the new issuance market in ECM and DCM have been on fire, because it's it's certainly a great. Thank God, it's been obviously very, very helpful in terms of revenue. We've looked at it is not so much as creating new sources of revenue. For example, do you do paid research for companies? I just don't think that fits into the ethos of what we want to do at Mizuho. But I think what we have looked at is more in terms of look at it from the other side, rather than from the revenue side, look at it from the expense side. Are there innovative ways for us to manage the cost of research better? And whether that's stuff like doing alliances with other, knowledge vendors or consultants, independents who are producing great research, have great industry knowledge. I think that is probably the way that we would prefer to look at it. So from the cost side rather than from the revenue side. And we all hope that volume continues, volumes come back, but that's we just have to that's beyond my control for sure. So I just really look at it from a different perspective. And at some point, we have to figure out, corporate access, because I think that was the disintermediation that we were all waiting to happen, and it never quite did as fast as we anticipated. So that to me is, the sector that is ripest for disintermediation, because it has been the one that has been lagging behind from what I see.
Okay. I have a couple of follow-ups on this conversation. So Mark, maybe you can address two things. One, have you thought about selling research directly to corporates? And two, are you seeing any demand from clients regarding ESG research specifically? Are you building it into your research processes, or are you leaving it to specialty providers?
Yeah. So two good questions on the corporate front. Yes, we are focusing on that. We're more focusing on finding partners and partnerships that can help us to do that, as opposed to making this our own independent driven wholesale effort. But yes, we are aiming at and trying to find new revenue streams from the corporate side, and beginning to see some success from that. But do I think that's going to be a massive new revenue stream? No. But do I think it's incremental? And do I think it has opportunity? Yes. And it's not to me about reshaping the product into a different form to accommodate that audience. But I do think the corporate audience is there. Separately on ESG, yes, we are spending more time and more energy there, and have been increasingly. We just this week we published a massive 150-page report on the hydrogen industry that combined a dozen of our analysts together across a wide range of disciplines to put that out, and we'll be doing a variety of events around that report, and that links in with ESG. We've got an ESG conference that's on the agenda, where we'll have a variety of sort of large asset manager keynote speakers there talking about their efforts, including some of the largest. So definitely a place we're looking. Where I've always struggled with ESG, and frankly still continue to be frank, is finding the incremental monetization of ESG. I am surely convinced that we're going to have to work in some of those metrics and work with some of the outside firms that provide sort of the baseline of how to measure ESG, which by the way is still very much a live topic of a conversation. I don't think anybody's settled on what the key metrics are yet. But as that settles, I think we are going to have to integrate more of that in as at least a part of our modeling and our metrics and what we present. But whether having a dedicated ESG effort, specifically, an ESG focused analyst per se, or team is going to be the right approach. I hesitate on that because I'm still not quite sure as a vertical effort how we get paid on that as an industry. I think everyone would love it. The clients would, say yes to it, especially those who have big ESG efforts. But am I convinced that they're going to pay us more for it? I'm not so sure. And that's, I think that has to be much more clear, even with the amount of money going towards ESG efforts. That has to be much more clear to me, and I think to all of us before, we invest, massive amounts around it. But incrementally, I think absolutely, and we're certainly putting effort around trying to frame the issues with our existing teams and resources because it's simply just a good topic of conversation within our existing domain sectors.
Hey, Jim, what about you?
ESG is something that we're evaluating. We don't have explicitly built out inside of our efforts or our models. Definitely something that we do hear about from the clients, but I share a lot of the comments that, the thoughts I share with a lot of the comments that Mark made around incremental monetization. Does it necessarily need another team? And also the struggle with figuring out what exactly are the metrics that matter. Are they absolute? Are they relative? And how does it all fit in is something that I want to make sure that we have the right strong guidance if we're not going to have a dedicated effort for ESG to help the analysts really figure out where they should be targeting their efforts.
And what about selling to corporates, especially with your...
Yeah, I think that as far as that goes, it would not be something that we would be doing in our own sort of native efforts if we were going to engage there. And we do hear from some of these vendors that are talking about bringing the offering to those. There's some that have been long-standing, of course, and some others that are out there. And that would be probably the way that we would want to attack that portion of the market.
Okay. So I'll leave it the last comment for Susan, since she's always good at getting in the last word. Any thoughts about what you're doing on ESG and selling to corporates?
Yep, sure. So we produced an ESG report on the energy sector earlier this year. Well received. It's always sexy to talk about it. You can get press attention, you get media attention. It's good for your brand. And I'm not saying that I'm not being cynical about it. It is important, and it is an important and growing part of the buy side. But at this point in our growth cycle, it's very hard to see how we get paid for it. I 100% agree with what Mark said, and obviously what Jim said. So I think it will remain a subtopic that within the industries for which it matters the most. I think, we encourage the analysts, for example, utilities, if there's a company that has particular, branding as a green energy company and can get that ESG premium, that we will emphasize it in our research, but not as a distinct, this is an ESG report stamp, ergo targeted at you. So it would be more like as is appropriate. And in terms of selling to corporates, not within the construct at this point. I think there are other people who are better suited to that, and I would rather that we retained our brand and our independence for high quality independent research.
Okay, and selling to corporates, or are you doing any of that? Are you reaching out to them?
We've discussed it, but no firm conclusions yet about it's a little bit about the pricing and the sizing of the market and how you do it in a way that's cost effective, right? Like any other business. Haven't been able to figure out how you get that to work, right? So that it makes enough sense.
Great. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating on this call. I want to thank the panelists, Nalindra, Susan, Mark, Jim. Nice talking to you again. And have a nice rest of the week.
Thanks, Mike.
Great to see everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for joining.
Bye. Bye.
Everyone.